The next time you watch the menu, I want you to replace every instance of the words the menu with the divine plan. Our divine plan is too precious to eat. The divine plan will now proceed. It's all part of the divine plan. Do that substitution and the entire film transforms. The restaurant stops being a restaurant and Julian Slowik stops being a chef. He becomes what he always was, the charismatic leader of a nihilistic death cult. And Hawthorne is not simply a restaurant on a private island off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, becomes an isolated cult compound. The Menu is one of the sharpest, funniest, most merciless films made in the last decade, and almost nobody talks about what it's actually doing. They talk about the class satire, the performances, and the cheeseburger. But the cheeseburger only really matters once you understand what Slowik actually believes and why he built the system he built to act on those beliefs. So that's what today's video is going to be about. We're going to sit down at Hawthorne together. We're going to go course by course, and by the time we're done, you're going to understand exactly what the menu has fed us. And do me a favor and subscribe down below. It really helps the channel out, and it's also my birthday. I'm Goblinsburg, and let's get started. Before the first course arrives, we need to understand the chef. Julian Slowik believes that humanity is a failed experiment, an evolutionary overcorrection that produced self-awareness at the cost of peace, and complexity at the cost of everything else that actually matters. His evidence is in Hawthorne, in his guests, 12 of them, the 1%, the most culturally significant people that money and influence can place at a table. And not one of them is happy. Not one of them is present, performing, consuming, judging, and needing, completely unable to simply be. There is a figure from Greek mythology who fits this perfectly. His name is Tantalus. Tantalus was a king, a son of Zeus, invited to dine with the gods on Mount Olympus. A man given everything, access to the divine table, immortality within his reach, and he ruined it in the most grotesque and horrifying way imaginable. He killed his own son, butchered him, cooked him, and served him to the Olympians as a feast to test whether the gods were truly omniscient. They were. They refused to eat, and Tantalus was sent to Tartarus. That's hell. His punishment was engineered to mirror his crime. He stands now, forever, in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree. When he reaches down to drink, the water recedes. When he reaches up to eat, the branches pull away. He is surrounded by abundance he can never touch, forever reaching and forever denied. Slowik's doomed diners are Tantalus figures, every single one of them. They're all wealthy beyond ordinary comprehension, surrounded by the finest food ever prepared by human hands, and completely incapable of receiving and appreciating it. They reach for the experience and it recedes from them. They pay for transcendence and they get an empty plate. They consume without tasting. They are standing in the water beneath the fruit tree and dying of thirst. And crucially, Slowik himself is Tantalus, more completely than any of his guests. Slowik named his first restaurant Tantalus. He announced his fate before he even understood it. And like the myth's protagonist, he himself sacrificed his child, not to butchery, but to what one can only assume was his quasi-religious pursuit of perfection, all on the altar of his art. And Slowik lives every day in proximity to these remains, which lay locked behind a silver door in his private quarters, preserved in a kind of reliquary, these photographs he cannot bear to look at and cannot bear to destroy. Like Tantalus, he is surrounded by the abundance he can never touch or experience with joy. He can never go back to the young man flipping burgers who hadn't yet both sold his soul and lost his family. Hawthorne is Tartarus, and Slowik built it himself. But nature doesn't have this problem. The ocean doesn't reach beyond the waves for the sky, and the sky doesn't strain towards the sea. They simply are. It is only human beings who plunder and pollute and exist in misery, because complexity breeds discord. Awareness breeds suffering. The idea of the self, of a me separate from you is the root and the wound. And Slowik's solution, his divine plan, the menu, is to return everything back to its component parts, to the soil, the air, the water, the simple, indifferent, perfect machinery of nature, running in lockstep without ego, without appetite, without the particular human catastrophe of wanting more than you have, and of wanting to be more than you're capable of being. And this is where Slowik ends up, obliterated by fire, transformed back into nutrients, fed back into the timelessness and perfection of nature. All except Erin, aka Margot. But we'll get back to her. This is how you build a cult. You need a belief system simple enough to be internalized, but total enough to answer every question. You need a leader with the charisma and intelligence to embody that ideology completely. You need a group of people whose traumas and tragedies make them receptive to the message. You need a system that isolates, breaks down, strips away individual identity, and reconstructs selfhood around the leader's absolute truth. And you need a threshold, a point of no return that makes leaving the cult impossible. Slowik has all of these. His gospel, the menu, is one of self-obliteration. The leader is, of course, Slowik. His congregation consists of his fanatical kitchen staff and the 12 carefully selected sinners whose specific failures against Slowik's worldview make them the ideal raw material, ingredients in Slowik's mortal degustation concept. The system is the menu, and the threshold comes later. What I want to point out now is the number 12. 12 guests, $1,200 plates, 12 acres of Hawthorne Island. And Slowik made a point of highlighting how bread has been around for 12,000 years, bread being the central image of his breadless plate. So why does the film highlight the number 12? The biblical resonance of 12 apostles, I think, is deliberate, but Slowik's 12 doomed guests are not apostles because Slowik has no interest in evangelizing. His cult doesn't want converts to spread the good word because the good word is, we are but a frightened nanosecond. And there is no point spreading a gospel whose conclusion is that gospels are pointless. These 12 are not disciples, they're ingredients, components of a celestial plate, cosmic parsley. The menu is the message. It is the manifesto. It is the catechism, a system of indoctrination that isolates, breaks down, depersonalizes, and spiritually subjugates. And it works because Slowik chose his congregation well. Every single guest he accounted for bowed to the menu in the end. They accepted Slowik's judgment as inevitable, because somewhere underneath the performance of their lives, they already knew what he knew about them. And that's the true horror underneath the dark humor. Not that Slowik was right, but that they believe in their heart of hearts that they are as Slowik says they are. Before the first course is served, there comes the amuse-bouche, the small bite that sets the palate, the preview of what's coming. The film uses the ferry ride and the tour of the island to establish the truth of Slowik's philosophy before he's spoken a single word of it. Watch how his doomed guests interact. Watch how they perform for each other and for themselves. Tyler is our entry point, and he is already stealing food from Margot on the ferry, already photographing everything against Slowik's explicit instructions not to. Despite his tedious insistence, he is not here to eat. He's here to gorge on a culture that does not belong to him. Lillian Bloom is already criticizing before she's tasted anything. Her publisher is already agreeing with everything she says, coddling and buttressing. The rich regulars are already barely tolerating each other, deeply in the misery of their lives. The finance bros are already being loud and crass and performing their wealth. George Diaz, the washed-up actor, is already performing accessibility in that weird way that famous people who've fallen off perform when they're wanting credit for being normal in public. Slowik hasn't even opened his mouth yet. He's not even present, but his argument is already proven. These people are the pinnacle of success, gathered in one room on one island, and not one of them can be simply present. Not one of them has arrived. They're all miserable, every single one of them trapped inside their own heads. The ideology of the menu is delivered with the first course, because the first course is not food, it's basically a sermon. Slowik represents the landscape surrounding Hawthorne, the soil, the water, the air, and the island itself essentially, as the actual meal. The food on the plate is secondary. What he is asking his guests is to internalize an idea that human beings are worth less than what surrounds them, that nature exists in a state of perfection precisely because it is simple. Earth, sea, and sky all exist in harmony. It is only human beings who cannot be satisfied with what they are. Wine that is paired with the course is the sommelier narrating theology alongside food, because the grapes are not just from a single vineyard, but a single row of vines. It's magical. The sommelier is not describing a wine, he's describing Slowik's ideal. Simplicity taken to its absolute extreme. A single row of grapes, a single expression of fruit, stripped of anything extraneous. The guests take this in, they perform the appreciation of appreciation, and Slowik watches them perform and knows exactly what they are and exactly what's coming. And now the punishment begins. Slowik withholds the bread, the most basic, ancient, democratic food, and delivers a sermon about what bread means, but what it means for class and labor and the hands that have labored to make bread for 12,000 years versus the hands that have never labored to make anything at all. Slowik's not really talking about bread. He's talking about his doomed guests, about the obscene distance between what they consume and what they have ever produced. The daily bread, the Eucharist, the compact between divine and mortal is being withheld. Because they don't deserve it. Because the daily bread is for people who do daily labor. And nobody in that room has labored daily for quite a long time. And watch how each guest receives the empty course. Every single one of them reveals exactly who they are in that moment of deprivation. Lillian Bloom finds something to criticize, to nitpick. She identifies the broken emulsion. Tyler heaps praise upon it and brown noses Slowik. The finance bros make annoying noise, and the regulars just look mildly confused and bored. And then there's Margot. Margot refuses the course entirely. She rejects the menu, the divine plan. She sees an empty plate smeared with sauce and a concept, not food. And she's not going to pretend otherwise. Just as the emulsion broke for Slowik's dish, so the emulsion breaks for his cult. So an emulsion, for those among us who have never watched the Great British Bake Off, is a temporary suspension of two things that don't naturally belong together. In this case, oil and water, held in uneasy combination by force of Slowik's art. When it splits, it reveals what was always true underneath, that these things, oil and water, do not belong together. Margot, being the socially broken emulsion, doesn't belong in this room with these people. And Bloom, in her pompous, oblivious way, points directly at the flaw in the system without understanding what she's doing. The cult has a broken emulsion, and Slowik knows it. The third course is named Memory, and it's when the cult transitions from ideology to control. Photographs laser printed on tortillas deliciosas, memories frozen in time. Each guest's worst moment, their most private shame, their most illegal secret. This is the cult gaining financial and psychological leverage over the guests. The sommelier's wine pairing is described as awoken from its slumber, a faint note of longing and regret. The wine is the film saying the subtext out loud. And then Slowik does something that reveals how completely his philosophy and his own inflated image has consumed him. He follows Margot into the woman's restroom. She refused a course, and this has broken something in his composure because he has built his entire system around the belief that people like her don't exist. There are only takers and makers, cooks and eaters. Her refusal to eat doesn't compute. His religion of binaries simply doesn't have a category for her. This is where the dining experience ends and the ritual truly begins. Jeremy Loudon, Slowik's sous chef, walks to the front of the room and shoots himself in the head. And to calm the panic of his guests, Slowik says it's all part of the menu. Here is the deployment of a thought-terminating cliche, the linguistic kill switch that every cult deploys when reality threatens to reassert itself. A phrase so total, so preemptive that it forecloses the possibility of questioning. Of course it's all part of the menu. Everything is part of the menu. The menu is all. Accept all of it, and forgive. Watch Bloom in this moment. She insists that it was stagecraft, performance art. She uses Slowik's own language. It's part of the menu as a shield against the reality of what she just witnessed. This is the cult indoctrination working. She has internalized the framework so completely that she is now using it to gaslight herself. She is defending the cult against her own perception. The sommelier describes the wine pairing for this course as a wonderful match with roasted proteins. And he's talking about Jeremy Loudon's brains. The cult has its first martyr. That threshold has been crossed, and the guests who moments ago were performing their sophistication, their worthiness, their connoisseurship are now just terrified. The performance has been stripped away, and what remains underneath is exactly what Slowik always said was there. So a palate cleanser is designed to clear the mouth between courses. What Slowik is clearing here is hope. Their specific truths are delivered like a diagnosis. Lillian Bloom is egotistical. Her publisher coddles her ego. And together they represent the self-sustaining system of cultural vanity. The critic who feeds on art without producing it, and the enabler who feeds on the critic. The rich regulars that have dined at Hawthorne 11 times over 5 years cannot name a single dish they've eaten. They have been gorging Slowik's art as a social currency for half a decade without ever truly experiencing it. And this is to Slowik the deepest possible offense, a thing that he cannot forgive. This is the Tantalus verdict delivered. They stood in the water. They reached down for the fruit. They were there, surrounded by abundance, and received none of it. The guests beg to understand why this is happening, and Slowik's answer is the film's most honest moment. He told them to think of themselves as ingredients in a degustation concept. They are not people to him. They are not even enemies. They are just components, raw material. They are nothing. Between the 4th and 5th courses, Slowik drowns Varric, his angel investor and the boss of the finance bros, in the ocean. This is not an impulsive decision. This is liturgical. Varric represents everything that has corrupted Slowik's art. The money that financed it, the capital that turned it into a commodity. By drowning Varric in the ocean, in the thalassic, the primordial, the elemental water that predates all else, Slowik is cleansing himself. A baptism in reverse. Not welcoming somebody into the faith, but removing the contamination that prevented that faith from being pure. And Slowik surfaces from this act changed, lighter, his obligations severed. The menu, the divine plan, can now proceed without hindrance. With the 5th course, called Man's Folly, Slowik is put on trial by his own system. His female sous chef stabs him in the thigh with kitchen shears, a ritual wounding for a sexual transgression, for Slowik trying to use his position of power to take something that was not offered. The wound connects him to his father, makes him culpable in the guilt of his gender, the impulse to dominate, to take, to convert everything encountered into something that serves the self. Slowik includes himself in this indictment. He is not exempt from his own gospel. He is as fallen as anyone in that room, and his wounds, the ones that produce his philosophy, the ones that drove him to this island and this kitchen and this Last Supper, are the same wounds he is diagnosing in his guests. The male guests are offered a chance to escape, but there's no real chance of escape, and there never was. It's designed to exhaust them, to demoralize them. But by the time they return, muddy and winded and abjectly humiliated, they're ready, not for escape, but for the final course. And then Slowik forces Tyler to cook. This is the ritual shaming the cult has been building towards since the 1st course. Tyler, the pick-me, the fake, the rich guy who fetishizes cuisine to steal credibility from people who actually work, is placed in front of a stove and asked to do the thing he has always only performed: to cook. He butchers it. He cooks lamb, which is a sacrificial animal and innocent, the thing that dies so something else can live, while everyone else watches. His incompetence is displayed, his pretension is exposed, and he is dismantled in full view of everyone. And then Slowik leans in and whispers something. We never hear it, and we don't need to, because whatever he said, Tyler believed it, and he hangs himself. The congregation is now broken. What remains is the question of whether broken people can be reassembled, or whether the breaking is the point. There is a silver door in Hawthorne. Behind the silver door is a reliquary. In the Catholic tradition, a reliquary is a container for sacred remains, the bones of a saint, the fragments of something holy that no longer exists in the world except in this preserved and reduced form. What Slowik's silver door represents, what's behind its mate in his private home on the island, is a room that appears to hold the furniture of his former life, the domestic world he abandoned for the kitchen, his childhood. And on the wall, a sequence of photographs, a life told in images. A young man flipping burgers at Hamburger Howie's, grinning in a kiss-the-cook apron, Slowik genuinely happy. We see then the young man getting serious about his craft, a rising chef attracting notice. And then he creates this restaurant called Tantalus, already announcing his fate. We see a family, a wife and child, and then that family is gone from the photographs, and Hawthorne appears, in the white chef's coat, in the island, and that's it. We see in this sequence the complete arc of a man who has sacrificed everything for a hell of his own making. Margot sees it. She feels it. She sees the boy behind the menu. She also uses the radio in that room to call for help. A boat appears in the water and rescue becomes visible. And then it recedes. The Coast Guard officer is Hawthorne's staff. The rescue is a course. Slowik anticipated every moment of this, that Margot would enter his sanctum, that she would see him, that she would find the radio, that hope would arrive in the room like a physical thing. He designed it. The silver door was bait. The radio was bait. The reliquary, the photos, the moment of genuine human recognition, the cruelest course of the entire menu. Because what he served to Margot was hope, and then he took that hope away. The fruit pulling away at the exact moment of contact, the water dropping below the lips. Slowik used her. The one element his system had failed to account for, the one person who saw through the performance, the one genuine person in the room, became an instrument of demoralization, delivered by the one guest he claimed to respect. He says he's been a monster, he's been a whore, but what he's doing tonight is pure. This is the true believer's final self-justification. The thing that separates a cult leader from a criminal is that a cult leader has a framework that makes the atrocity sacred. Slowik doesn't see himself as a murderer. He sees himself as a man who has finally, after a lifetime of compromise, after Tantalus, after the family, after the angel investor, after the slow death of everything he loved, finally done one pure thing, one uncorrupted act. The purity he couldn't find in his art. The purity he lost when the boy at Hamburger Howie's became the chef at Hawthorne. He found it in the fire. And just when all hope is lost, Margot orders a cheeseburger. Because she, like Slowik, knows from her profession what people want. And she inferred from his reliquary of photos what Slowik may not have been able to admit to himself, that his pursuit of perfection killed his love of art. And because of her trade in intimacy, she knows how to give people what they want indirectly, leading them gently to their needs. And Slowik makes the cheeseburger. And in making it, something happens that his system did not account for, but what Margot was counting on. He remembers what cooking felt like before the menu consumed him, before the pursuit of divine perfection replaced passion. He makes her a cheeseburger, and she eats it, and Slowik lets her go. Because she reminded him of the thing he had lost and could never get back. Appetite. Lust for life. Honest, uncomplicated desire without the albatross of the menus, shame, and guilt. But the rest of the sinners received the final course. S'mores. Graham crackers and chocolate and marshmallow, smooshed together by hand, requiring no skill, no training, no theory. A dessert that anyone can make, the opposite of everything Hawthorne represents. And the s'mores become the mechanism of their obliteration. His congregation returned, finally, to their component parts. In the water, in the soil, in the air. Slowik and his kitchen staff incinerated by the very ovens they slaved over in life. Now let's come back to the beginning. Replace the menu with the divine plan. And now you can see it. The clap that conditions the congregation. The courses that move from ideology to leverage to destabilization to obliteration. The 12 sinners chosen for the specific ways their lives give Slowik's gospel its proof. The thought-terminating cliches deployed at exactly the moment reality becomes undeniable. The martyrs, the ritual shaming. Slowik was running a cult whose doctrine was that there should be no more cults, whose gospel was that gospels are pointless. And he was right about almost everything. His guests were unhappy, the 1% consuming without receiving, existing without living. He was right about Tyler, right about Bloom, right about his regulars, right about the actor, right about all of them. They were Tantalus, standing in the water, reaching for the fruit, surrounded by abundance they could never touch. And Hawthorne for Slowik was always Tartarus, the punishment and the crime perfectly mirrored, the gods delivering to him what was owed. But he was wrong about Margot, because Margot wasn't a taker or a maker. She was just hungry. And genuine hunger, the uncomplicated, unkillable desire for something real, is the one thing that no philosophy can obliterate. The cheeseburger is life itself. It is lust for life. It is the will to go on. Everything else is just the sermon. If this video cracked something open for you, let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more of this, and remember, there's always a story beneath the story. I'm Goblinsburg, and I'll see you in the next one.